Today, it is getting cooler outside, and so I have decided that I'm going to go ahead and make my tried and true granola. It's homemade, and it's just a lot better to eat than some of the things that you see on the shelves in the stores, because they put some agents in there, some chemicals in there to keep it long on the shelf, and that's not healthy. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a little bit more of my own store-bought items, yes, but they're not pre-packaged. They're just, so you might want to do your research on that, because you never know. You never know what they're putting in those packages to keep them stored on the shelf for long periods of time. So I'm going to go ahead and do some chocolate chip cookies. I might even keep some for myself. And I'm going to finish up making my bread. I'll show you how I am baking that, and then I'll probably link another video that shows you from beginning to end on how to make a nice artisan bread. I just started baking my own bread probably about 6 months ago. Well, more like 2 years ago I started doing it, but now I've gotten to a point where I'm doing it more regularly. I have not purchased bread from the stores for probably 6 months now. So it can be time consuming, but it is really enjoyable once you just embrace the process and realize that just getting started is half the battle. Don't get intimidated by the process, by the machinery, by the ingredients. Just get started and watch and see what happens when you start building that momentum, that confidence, and that success. And you'll really enjoy what you're doing for yourself and for your family. So join me while I make a few things to, again, put away in the freezer for our daughter. Okay, so I'm going to get started on getting my bread in the oven before I start on preparing the cookies. All right, I have added yesterday my flour, my yeast, salt, and water. And I will link the measurements, and I'll probably do another video on how to make this, because I just thought I will incorporate this into the freezer meal, and I can also take this bread, wrap it up, and freeze it as well. So this has been rising a little over 24 hours. You can just kind of gauge on what your temperature is, what the time of year it is, your climate as far as in your home. But this is something that has doubled in size, and ooh, oh yeah, that smells wonderful. All right. So hopefully you can see. I am just simply taking my bread flour, and I'm just going to go ahead, matter of fact, I'm going to get an apron on. That is probably the number one thing to do when you are working with flour. Okay, I've got 2 apron choices here. Tell me what you think, because I'm not an expert. I just want comfort and just a quick throw on, throw off apron. So I bought this. I think I got it on Amazon over the holidays. Let me see if I'm doing this right. Okay. Yeah, I think you just put it over like that and stick your arms through. I think it kind of like crisscrosses in the back. It's not the most flattering apron, but it does the job. You know what? I'm just going to leave it on. So, get your apron, and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of flour on the top of my dough. That's just what I choose to do. And I'm going to get my oven preheated to 450. myself a towel. And I have a plastic dough scraper. This came with my mixer and it works perfectly. So maybe you can find one of these on Amazon, I'm not sure, but I got this with my Ankershroom bread mixer. In this recipe, I love it because it's just a nice, pretty, doughy bread that I can whip up and always have on hand rather than having to go through the whole process of, you know, kneading it in a mixer. It's just a nice, quick recipe. So now what I'm gonna do is, I am going to take my flour, and hopefully you can see this, and I'm going to put it on my cutting board. I like my cutting board. Some people do this right on the counter and it works. I've done it. I just like having the cutting board, so if I have to, because I have such a small space, if I have to quick do a cleanup or move this, I can do that and then clean it later. And not that I don't clean it right away, but just I could do it later. So yeah, I just go ahead and I spread that around over my cutting board, just kind of giving a light layer. All right, so we have our flour spread, which will make it a lot easier when we take this dough out, because this dough acts like a sourdough. It is not a sourdough. I didn't do this with the sourdough starter. I did it with a quick recipe that I will show you. I am working on fine-tuning my sourdough skills, but for now, again, this is just a quick recipe. So, but it smells like sourdough. It's got a very boozy kind of smell. So, and it's delicious. So it works for us. So it is a very sticky dough, and that's why I put flour on top. And so you'll see when I scrape it out of here, it's, you know, it tends to stick quite a bit. Don't worry about that if you don't get every little amount out. You know, just scrape it out onto your floured surface. And what I like about this specific recipe is it is so fast. You'll love it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply kind of, you know how I fold it over and then I turn it with my scraper. Fold it over and then I turn it. Fold it over and then I turn it. And what I'm trying to obtain is just that nice folded in round dough. Okay. Now what I can do is use my hands a little bit more. I can flip it over and get some more flour on there. Don't be afraid if you do get it on the surface. You can put it right back into the bread. And then you can always add a little bit more flour as you go to get that surface with more flour. So I'm going to just take my hand, I'm going to fold it over, and then I'm going to turn it, and then I'm going to fold it over, and I'm going to turn it and fold it inward and turn. And just do that to basically get it folded into the shape of a round ball. I like to kind of play around with it a little bit and get those air bubbles out. So again, I am very new at this, but I love the outcome and the taste, and that's really all that matters. Don't be so caught up in the look of it, right? I did not grow up with bread makers, but bread eaters. So This is a new skill for me. All right, now that I have that, what I'm going to simply do is I am going to cut up some parchment paper. That's what I like to use. And I cut it up in 2 rectangle positions. And don't have to use my scissors, but sometimes I can't always get it to cut off perfectly in the right way. But here we go. All right, I think it's gonna work. We got it. And I don't worry about the next rectangle being the same size. I might just roughly kind of hold it up to it and then get an idea of how long I want it. So, and then I crisscross it like that. That's what works for me. I've seen other bakers do this, and like I said, you will get comfortable with your method of how you are preparing your bread. But for me, this is what works. I've been doing it for several months now, and we absolutely love it. And then what I do is I just get a little bit more flour on it. And as I'm turning it, I kind of feel some wet spots. I might add, you know, just some loose flour onto it. I might leave it alone. My point is that I have it in a nice round ball. I've tried to get those air bubbles out. And then I take my scraper, and again, don't be intimidated. And I just simply scrape it and flip it in my hand like that and drop it. I just drop it pretty much centered if I can on the paper, like that. All right, and I'm going to put my towel over my bread, like that. And it's pretty cold out, but I think it's gonna be okay. And I'm gonna leave it here for 30 minutes to rise again. And I'll show you how we're gonna bake this. Okay, so we have our cutting board clean. In fact, it's drying right here. And another reason why I like to use a cutting board is because I'm going to be putting the pot after it comes out of the oven on here to then transfer the bread into the pot. So I have got my oven that's been preheating for more than 15 minutes, but I'm gonna go ahead and I'm simply going to put my cast iron pot, and I like to have these round ones to make this artisan bread because it just has a nicer shape to it. But you can make your breads in a different pot. That's entirely up to you. So I'm gonna stick that in there, and I'm gonna let that now heat up for 15 minutes, and we'll have at least had our 30 minutes for the bread to rise. So, timer 15. And then we'll let those get nice and hot for 15 minutes and transfer our bread here shortly. All right, so while that is heating up, I'm gonna go ahead and this is our bone broth that we had just canned yesterday. Got our freezer cleaned out of a lot of chicken bones, and we even, I think, put pork bones in here with some vegetables, and we had that cooking in our big pot for, oh my gosh, it was at least 48 hours. Smelled amazing in here for several days. So those are ready to go. They've all been tested. The rings have been removed, and I went ahead and used some hot soapy water, wiped down this area here to make sure that I'm not storing these with any type of residue. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this area off while my pots heat up. Okay, that is our timer for the pots. They are very hot. and preheated. So I'm gonna put this here. Our bread is risen. You might even notice that it goes a little flat. Not necessarily flat, but spread out, and that's okay. This recipe is foolproof. So, all right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bottom piece of my parchment paper. Hopefully you can see this. Move everything down. So I am taking the bottom piece of my parchment paper and lifting the bread up to then place it centered as best as I can into the pot. Again, it's very hot. It's very hot, so be very careful. And then what I'm going to do is I have this, it's called an artisan bread lame, and it gives a nice little design to your bread. So you can just kind of play around with it, have fun with it. But when I first got started, all I simply did, and really I have not expanded on my skills of this. I think I need a better knife. So if you have a suggested knife, or lame, I guess they call it, let me know. Because this is just a simple wooden handled lame with a razor blade that's very bendable. But the sharpness on this blade is not the best. Okay, so you can see inside the bowl, there's my bread. And I'm simply going to take the edge of the blade, and I usually just go down as hard as I can to cut into the bread, and I might have to like pull it a little bit and just kind of make like a little half moon. And then I might do like a little design on the other side, like little, you know, lines or something, like a little wheat look. But play around with it. Some people just literally do like a cross. So you'll see how that ends up looking. And then before I put it back in the oven, I will go ahead and give it a light dusting. That's what it looks like, a light dusting of flour on top. And I'll just take a little bit of my flour. And like I said, just a light little dusting I'll put on top. You don't have to do that. That's just what I like it to look like when I take it out. Okay, again, still very hot. Now I'm going to put my lid over this. Now the paper will come out a little bit. Make sure you have the right grade of paper, because this is 450 degrees and parchment paper has temperature readings of what it should be at the maximum for. This one is safe, but do your own research and get a nice size parchment paper, or a nice parchment paper that can handle this high temperature. And now I'm just going to go ahead and take it over to the oven. All right, and I just kind of make sure that the lid is on there, positioned pretty tightly. And stick it in there. There we go. All right, I'm going to set this for 25 minutes. And when that's done, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take it out of the oven, remove the lid, and put it back in the oven for 15 more minutes. Okay, so while that is heating up, I'm going to go ahead and get my recipe started for making my chocolate chip cookie freezer balls. That's going to go ahead, and once that's all mixed up, they'll sit in the freezer and they'll be ready to pop in the oven for when she wants them for the kids. And I might bake some now for Andy and I. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and get this mixed up and I'll show you how. Okay, so here is our chocolate chip cookie freezer balls. And we're going to go ahead and get this stuff mixed up. We need butter, white sugar, brown sugar, vanilla extract, an egg, flour, baking soda, salt, and chocolate chips. Okay. Okay, so I've got a half a cup of butter that's going in here. All right, got my other half a stick that's nice and soft. Add it in here. Now keep in mind that when your butter is salted, you don't have to add the salt to your recipes. It's okay if you do, but to just reduce, just to avoid if it is overly salted, you can leave that out. All right, so we've got our half a cup of butter, and we want to put both of our sugars in here as well. So we got a 1/4 cup of white sugar and a 1/4 cup of brown. So we've got our brown sugar over here. Doesn't have to be perfect, really. I just kind of smash it down a little bit to get it in there. Got our 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And a 1/4 cup of our white sugar. I use cane sugar. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix that up for 2 minutes. And I apologize that I am not using a clear bowl for you to see. But I will probably run through this pretty quick. We all know how to make chocolate chip cookies. I just wanted to include that in the freezer meals because those are always a fun treat to have for her other daughters. I'm going to go ahead and double this recipe. So I can have some fresh chocolate chip cookies for a nice little snack. And have plenty to have in the freezer. And another 1/4 cup of my brown sugar. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this up now. Okay, this is what it means to be fluffy. So it literally is very soft and easy to scrape and almost form into a ball. So that's the texture that we want. Okay, now, like I said, I have doubled the recipe so far. Now I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. I will leave this recipe but for one of the batches, which equals 24 cookies. So this is actually going to be for 48 that I'm going to make. But now I need to add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And this is our homemade vanilla extract. You can see the beans in there. And we gave these out as Christmas gifts last year. This was ready to use in April of 2025. So what you can do is you can actually do the process again and use those same beans. So we're going to probably try that. But for now, this still smells absolutely amazing. All right, so again, for the single recipe, you're going to do 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. All right, and we're going to add the egg and vanilla and beat until that's incorporated. So we're just going to keep beating that through. So we need 1 egg, and because it's doubled, we're doing 2 eggs. Okay, so that's 1 and 2. Okay, so we went ahead and we beated our egg and our vanilla just to incorporate it into the mixture. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to place our flour in the center of the bowl and stir in the baking soda and salt. So for our flour, we need 1 cup of baking all-purpose flour. And I use the brand King Arthur unbleached flour. At least it says it's unbleached. So I'm not quite sure what you use. Leave a comment. And let me know. This doesn't have to be precise. You can just literally like shake it in there. But if you would like to, you could just take your knife and scrape that off. Put it right in the middle. And again, I'm doubling. And now what I need to do is, after I put in my 1 cup of flour, I'm going to do a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Half a teaspoon. So that's 1. Two of my baking soda. And yes, my butter was salted, but I'm going to go ahead and add this salt anyway because it is Redmond's real salt and it's a very healthy salt. So I don't mind having that salt with the salted butter. Okay, and it says to stir that in. So if you can see, I'm just simply going to stir it into the flour. And then once that's all incorporated into the flour, I can go ahead and mix it in with the mixer. Okay, so there is my timer. My bread just simply needs to have the lid removed. So be very careful, it's very hot. I usually take it out and then remove the lid. As you can see, that's what it looks like. And then these last 15 minutes are really going to make a difference. Wait till you see what the bread looks like after 15 more minutes with the lid off. All right, I believe that the last step is a cup of chocolate chips, which I will double. Now that that is all incorporated. So now what we're going to do is add in our chocolate chips. And again, I'm doubling the recipe. Whoops. I'm going to put in 1, 2 cups of my chocolate chips. And I'm going to stir that together. You know, it's funny. When I look at that bread, I think back, I used to make a beer bread. And I used to do that pretty regularly when I first got married, before I had children. And it was just such a simple recipe with a can of beer. I don't know if that was healthy or not, but it was a fun recipe. So I have actually made bread in the past, just not artisan bread. Okay, so you can see I'm just simply stirring the dough in with the chocolate chips, kind of coating that dough. With the chocolate chips, giving it a nice, even, as much as possible, coating. And what I might do even is just taking the dough, and hopefully you can see that, and I'm just going to kind of roll it into those chocolate chips and get it incorporated more with the chocolate chips. All right, now I've got to lower my temperature in the oven because the cookies, they will only need to bake at 350. But for the purpose of getting these that I'm going to freeze up, I do not need the oven. So now I am just going to use a tablespoon size cookie scoop to portion out the cookies on a baking sheet and put this entire baking sheet in the freezer. And I can put lots on here because I'm not baking these. And then I'm going to also just do a quick little roll. So when they freeze up, plus I can get a better visual of how much dough is on these. So I'm going to make a total of 24. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So 2 more. So I'm going to go ahead and get these in the freezer. Then what I need to do is set this into the freezer flat. And you can see spacing doesn't really matter when you're freezing them. Okay, so you hear my timer. So I will show you what the bread looks like now that it's been sitting in the oven for an additional 15 minutes without the lid on. And it really makes a huge difference, like I said. There it is. Isn't that gorgeous? Isn't that just gorgeous? Hopefully you can see that. Oh my gosh. And I love just the little sprinkle of flour on there. Now it is still very hot. So you let that sit outside of the pot. Let that sit outside of the pot. And what I mean by that is I will take my bread out of the pot because this pot is so hot that it is still baking basically in there. So remember that parchment paper is not hot to the touch. So I'm going to get that bottom piece on both sides and lift it out of there and put it onto my cooling rack. Now what I can do is let this cool. It's not really going to cool too much because I'm still using the oven for the cookies. But I'm going to go ahead and put the cookies on and get those baked up as that cools down. This paper's loud, but you can kind of see. I mean, it's hot. But I usually take it out and put it right onto my cooling rack. Another thing I like to do is, since I can use these at the temperature, I will use them twice. So I save them because they're already pre-cut. I know that there are some stores that sell pre-cut parchment paper. So I probably need to do that. But for now, I just simply save what I just used, and I'll use it on another bread baking. All right, so while that cools, I'm gonna go ahead and get these down to my freezer to, I believe they're going to freeze for an hour or maybe 2, and then I'll pop them into large freezer bags, and she can go ahead and pop these out when she is ready to make some cookies. So I'll be back to show you how we cut up our bread. Okay, our bread is been cooling for about 5 minutes. You kind of just gauge on when you feel comfortable cutting it, but isn't that gorgeous? So it is a little warm to the touch. Now, you can notice that there's a little bit of like a ridge there, and that's simply because of the parchment paper that's on there. So it would be a nice round shape if I didn't have that parchment paper in there. But it's delicious. I don't really care about the looks right now. I will fine tune that skill at another time. I'm just excited to have this recipe and to keep it simple. So this I bought on Amazon, and I'm not crazy about it. This is called, I think, a bow knife, bread bow knife. And people use this, see that? People use this to cut their larger loaves, but it just doesn't seem to have a good handle grip for me. So I use my bread knife. Oh, my glasses on. There we go. Because I'll be honest, second time I used this, I did cut myself. Pretty good. So do some research, leave a comment on what knife you're using, because this I'm not a big fan of. Maybe I just don't have the technique down, but it is a bread bow knife. So, all right. So again, I am just going to simply use my serrated bread knife. And what you can do is you can even stand it up like that and cut it down like this, or you can, manage to do it this way. So look at that bread. I don't know if you can see that. You see how nice and doughy that is? And just beautiful. It's so good. Again, it's not sourdough, but it has a sourdough taste, look, even feel. The difference, sourdough bread is actually very healthy for you. The sourdough starter, the mix, supposedly is very beneficial to your gut. And so this doesn't have those benefits, but it is a delicious bread to whip up and have on hand if you need it. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to cut through this. I have seen on, I think it's Amazon. See that steam coming off of there? Oh my gosh. just not the easiest to cut. But it is important to cut it as soon as you are ready to cut it. Don't wait, because it does get harder to cut. And when you already have it pre-sliced, it makes it a lot easier. Now, if you're going for a presentation and you just want to have it on the table, you know, that's fine. Look at that steam coming off of there. Look at that. You see that steam? So good. Get a couple slices out of this because I don't really skimp on my slices. They're usually pretty thick. And I usually make 2 of these when I do make them. But I am running out of flour. Okay, so now that I have it cut up, and it is not beautiful when you cut it up. I'm going to let it cool still, but I will go ahead and then transfer it to my bread bag. And this is I believe it's canvas material, maybe. Oh, it's cotton. 100% cotton. So I'll transfer it in there, and it does stay nice and fresh. All right, so I've got my cookies baking in the oven. I'm gonna go ahead and get this cleaned up a little bit, and then we'll start on our granola. Okay, so we've got our oven. We've got our cookies done. We've got our oven still at 350 from the cookies, and now we're going to go ahead and move on to our granola. Now, one of the things that I like to do is keep it simple for my granola, especially for my daughter, who this is going to go to because she has little ones and they might not like all the things that go into granola. But that's what I love about making this, is that you make it to your taste. You really can't go wrong. You can just substitute things here and there. For example, I do not like coconut, and this recipe does call for coconut, but you don't have to put it in. What you can do, you can substitute that with some dried fruit, with raisins, with chocolate chips. You know, you kind of play around with the recipe yourself. But I'm just going to go ahead and make this basic granola so we can have that stored up and have it throughout the next couple of months. So I'm trying to get into a more routine of keeping that on hand, simply because that is something that we go through, and I don't really want to buy the prepackaged granola from the store. I would rather make it myself now that I know how. So that's what we're going to go ahead and finish up with. All right, so we're going to start with 4 cups of our rolled oats. You're going to start with your dry ingredients first. 4. Okay, another thing that I like about making my own granola is how many times do we have leftover nuts from the holidays? And nuts can go rancid. I keep mine in the freezer, but these I had just opened in October. I think it was for Thanksgiving. And I'm just going to go ahead and move through these through my granola. I did a granola with pecans, and now I'm out of pecans, so now I'm going to move through my walnuts. All right, so now what we want to put in is a half a cup of either pecans or walnuts or whatever nut that you prefer. All right, we're going to put a half a cup of these. I don't mind putting more than a cup of them. More than a half a cup of those. Okay, again, you just kind of play around with how you want to do it. And you can usually do them whole, or you can chop them up and put them in. I'm just keeping them whole just so we have some granola, because I will, as I'm stirring this up, I'll probably be moving through those and chopping them up myself. All right, then you can use almonds, or you can use sunflower seeds, like I said, the coconut. But then once you have your dry ingredients in here, you can just simply stir them up. And because I don't have any other nuts I'm adding in, I thought I had some leftover sunflower seeds, but I do not. And that's okay. You know, I want to get through my nuts. So I'm just going to add another cup of my walnuts. All right. So now that I have lightly stirred my dry ingredients together, add in the remainder of the dry ingredients, which will be, for mine, I'm going to add my cinnamon and salt. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add in my half a teaspoon of cinnamon and my quarter teaspoon of salt. Okay, I'm going to stir that in as well. I'm going to add in my olive oil. You can use maple syrup. I prefer honey. That is your decision. But in that case, you will go ahead and add in a half a cup of olive oil and a half a cup of maple syrup or honey. So in order to use the half a cup both times, I am just simply going to do my olive oil first. Make sure you're buying the right honey. You can do some research and find out ways of testing your honey to ensure that it's pure raw honey. And see how much cleaner that comes out because I did the olive oil first. A little trick that I learned. All right. Just going to set that aside. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir all of this together. Give it a nice stir to incorporate everything, your wet ingredients into your dry ingredients. Remember, you added your cinnamon, your salt, so we just want to give that a really good stir. And then if you have any leftover dried cranberries, go ahead and throw those in. We're not big cranberry fans. Plus, again, I'm making this for her kids. So if they want to add in dried fruit, they can always throw that into, if they're going to add this to yogurt, they can throw that in separately and then just add the granola on top. So you can either bake it with it or add it later. And you are adding it later because you add that after it's baked. So it's really kind of the same process. I like a lot of cinnamon in mine, so I'm going to add a touch more. And I just kind of give it like a smell test. Andy likes vanilla in our granola, so, you know, splash some of that in if you want. Either way, experiment. You know, it's all good. Yeah, that smells good. I have not added that much before, so do some taste tests. But you can't go wrong with vanilla. It smells amazing.